Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I'm so honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Professor Geoffrey Cohen and Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum. FAN's celebrating its 40th anniversary this year, and we're honored to have the robust support of dozens of schools, nonprofits, corporations, families, and individuals from across the country. We're deeply committed to our vision of an informed and compassionate community, and will achieve that vision by presenting fresh ideas that elevate minds, expand hearts, and make the world a better place. We have hundreds of videos of past events archived on our YouTube channel, so please be sure to subscribe to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for some introductions. Geoffrey Cohen's research examines processes that shape people's sense of belonging in self and implications for social problems. He studies the big and small threats to belonging and self-integrity that people encounter in school, work, and healthcare settings, and strategies to create more inclusive spaces for people from all walks of life. He believes that the development of psychological theory is facilitated not only by descriptive and observational research, but by theory-driven interventions. Professor Cohen is Professor of Psychology and the James G. March Professor of Organizational Studies in Education and Business at Stanford University. Joining him will be Beverly Daniel Tatum, the interim president at Mount Holyoke College. She's a clinical psychologist widely known for both her expertise on race relations and as a thought leader in higher education. Her 13 years as the president of Spelman College from 2002 to 2015 were marked by innovation and growth, and her visionary leadership was recognized in 2013 with the Carnegie Academic Leadership Award. Dr. Tatum is the author of the best-selling books, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, and Other Conversations About Race, now in the 2017 20th anniversary edition, and Can We Talk About Race and Other Conversations in an Era of School Resegregation, published in 2007. She is a sought-after speaker on the topics of racial identity development, race and education, strategies for creating inclusive campus environments, and higher education leadership. Let's now welcome Professor Cohen and Dr. Tatum.
Here in conversation with our guest author, Dr. Geoffrey Cohen, someone whose work I really admire and whose book is just fabulous. So it's just wonderful that you can buy one and get one free. So welcome to you, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Beverly. I'm thrilled and delighted to be here with the audience and in this venue, and especially with you. I have long admired your work, and we go way back.
Indeed.
So I'm delighted to be here in conversation with you.
And I am very excited to, first of all, as I said, it's a fabulous book and I have lots of questions, but every book has a backstory. And I would love to ask you, what is the backstory of your book? Why this book right now? What brought you to it?
Well, my colleagues and I have been doing research for a long time. I would say 2 or 3 decades that is grounded in social psychology. And we've been plowing away at this work, which now turns out to have so much relevance to where we are now, what Pete Buttigieg calls a crisis of belonging in our society and perhaps across the world, where we are fragmented like almost never before. And I think our work has a lot to say about how to bridge divides and make things a little bit better, at least in our own corners of social life. And so that was the impetus.
Well, it does seem like it's a very timely book, given the polarization in our society. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a little while. But I, of course, have been familiar with your work through my lens as an educator in higher education. And in particular, very interested in belonging as it connects to the experiences of students who often feel what you call belonging uncertainty, whether that's because they're first-gen students or maybe students of color, or for whatever reason, feeling marginalized and uncertain about whether they belong. And we know through your research and others how important belonging is for persistence and success in education in particular, and in the rest of our lives perhaps as well. One of the things that I recall that you talk about in the book and that I've read about in some of your articles is what you call the 3 T's. interventions which are tailored, targeted, and timely. And what I have really appreciated about these interventions is how they seem so practical for institutions like the colleges that I've been associated with to put into practice if we understood them, if we knew them. So could you talk a little bit about those 3 T's? I know there are a lot of educators listening.
Yeah. Well, the 3 T's refers to targeted, tailored, and timed. And it just captures this idea that I think we're all familiar with in our daily lives, that when the right person gets the right support at the right time, it can be transformative. So my colleagues, especially Greg Walton, David Jaeger, Claude Steele, many others, have developed a suite of interventions, what we call interventions. I don't quite like that term, a suite of practices that help students, especially from marginalized backgrounds, to feel more like they belong, especially during these treacherous transitions into college or into graduate school or into high school. I mean, we all have what Greg and I have called belonging uncertainty at certain points in our life, but the volume on that uncertainty can be turned way up if one is coming in from a member of a historically underrepresented or excluded group. So what we've done is to develop over the years a series of practices, one being, for instance, just presenting incoming students with stories of more senior students who explain how feeling like you don't belong in college is normal and likely to be short-lived. We give people like testimonials from people who are 3 or 4 years ahead of them, which serves to just convey that, if you're not sure if you belong, give it a little time, hang in there a little bit longer. It's not likely to be unique to you or to people in your racial group. And I'm simplifying a lot, but what we have found is that that simple message can have ripple effects years and years later, having the achievement gap in one college setting that we've worked with, increasing the GPA and reducing disciplinary rates of disciplinary problems in high school. So what we've been trying to figure out is, well, how can such a brief experience, this was a 1-hour experience, have such large effects? And I really think it boils down to when people are having a question on their mind, do I belong? It's very helpful to have it answered in the affirmative. So that's the right message, the right person. These are freshmen wondering if they belong. They're not sure. You're stepping into that door of a party and you're like, am I a stranger in a strange world or not? That moment of stepping into the door, that is an embryonic moment where a little support can go a long way. So that's timing and tailoring. It's about belonging. It's not about whether you can do it or whether you can succeed. It's about, do you potentially have the ability to belong here and be part of a community? And when the things we do with one another resonate with those 3 T's, what would otherwise be a non-event can actually become a turning point. And so that's where the origin of the 3 T's comes from.
Well, it's a great way to describe and make clear to, a non-psychologist, a layperson, how they might begin to think about creating that atmosphere or that notion of belonging for students, or I'm even thinking in the workplace. One of the things about your book is that you talk about a variety of different settings where these practices could be put into place to good effect. You use a term that I love, and I have repeated it a lot, and that's situation crafting. Crafting the situation, and focusing on a situation, of course, brings us to a core concept in social psychology and maybe a core behavior, and that is what we know as fundamental attribution error. Yeah. That seems to be a core concept in this book, and I wonder if you could explain it to those who might not remember their intro psych.
That's a great question. The answer has 2 parts. The first part is the demonstration in social psychology and in the social sciences of the power of the social situation. So of course, we're shaped by our personality, Of course, ability matters, these things internal to us. And of course, systems and structures and history and culture matter immensely, of course. In addition, though, the situation we're in right here, right now, matters a lot too. And the big discovery, I would say, over the past 60 years in social psychology is that the situation right here, right now, the social situation, who we're with, what's going on, the physical setting, that has so much sway over our behavior. And the really good news is, unlike the past, the present situation can be changed, and it's in our power to change it. And that's where this term situation crafting comes from, or that I was trying to capture, is this idea that we each have a kind of superpower. I mean, I use that term sparingly. I'm a fan of superhero comics, so I'm using it sparingly, but I do believe it is like a superpower, the ability, because we are each part of a social situation, wherever we go, there we are, we share some of that power in the situation to transform it. And that could be in our roles as managers, as educators. One of the most brilliant studies that I just long admired is by Rosenthal Jacobson, where he simply shows that leading teachers to expect more of their students increases the IQ and achievement of those students over the course of the year. The teachers, by changing their mindset, change the situation for their students in a way that unlocks their potential. So that's the first part of the answer, is the power of the situation to shape us. And its availability as a lever that we can all pull. No matter where we are, we can all make every situation at least a little bit better. Now, the fundamental attribution error refers to the fact that we underestimate the power of the situation. We get it a little bit wrong. And it's a term coined by my colleague, recently deceased, brilliant colleague, Lee Ross, the fundamental attribution error, that he used this term to capture just the way we go about our lives, thinking that what really matters in driving, especially other people's behavior, is who they are, their personality, their character, their grit, their wit, their intelligence. We are continually searching for these interior essences, and it affects our educational practice in some pretty perverse ways. We're constantly trying to measure students. We get it wrong, is the big discovery here with the fundamental attribution error, because we systematically underestimate how powerful the situation is. And many, many laboratory studies, this is one of the most replicated studies of effects in social psychology, demonstrate how when we're trying to explain people's behavior, when we're trying to influence people's behavior, we overestimate personality and we underestimate the situation right here, right now, as it's being experienced by the people we're trying to support, and as it's being experienced as a result, sometimes, of the things we're doing to create that situation.
Well, when you talk about that fundamental attribution error, as you said, it's something we all do. If somebody is driving crazily, we say, what's wrong with that person? We don't say, gosh, they must really be in a need to get to the hospital with their pregnant wife, or whatever it might be, but there are times when it's hard to remember that it might be the situation. And that is particularly true when we are thinking about or talking about people whose attitudes and behaviors are diametrically different, maybe opposed to our own.
Yeah.
One of the moments that we're in right now is a time of extreme polarization politically in our nation. And I'm wondering if you could talk about how what you know about the fundamental attribution error might help someone who's struggling with maintaining a sense of empathy with someone whose attitudes are so different from their own.
It's so hard. I mean, I know I have family, I have friends that have very wide-ranging opinions, and I've said things that have been pretty dogmatic, I think, regrettably. Even though, as I go into, I know as the research suggests, even when we're on the side of virtue, we do little good, I think, in reaching other people's hearts and minds with an authoritarian style. an authoritarian style. So the authoritarian style refers to just how in our day-to-day lives, we can act like little authoritarians. We think that what we think is objective and right. This is what's known as the objectivity illusion. I believe I see the world as it is, and therefore anyone who disagrees with me must by definition either be uninformed, mentally incapacitated, or biased. And so this objectivity illusion, this faith that we have, that we see the world as it is a huge threat to belonging far and wide. And one of the antidotes, I think, is humility. It's humility, is understanding that one's own point of view is just one point of view. And of course, sometimes we need to stand up and even die for our point of view, but it is still a point of view, I think. And it's important that we understand when we're interacting across these fault lines that people who are coming from different points of view will not be receptive to us if they feel condemned or vilified. So one example of situation crafting to deal with this kind of dilemma that was investigated by a graduate student, brilliant graduate student in my lab, Michael Schwabe, he, to make a long story short, showed that the way we talk with each other can have a big effect. Simply expressing our political opinions with phrases such as "I think," or "from my point of view," and then it's the same point of view, same position, makes the other side much more open to what we're saying, much more curious, and much more likely to try to understand. And not only that, the person who does the communicating like that becomes a little less susceptible to confirmation bias in their own lives. So this is an example of how, by crafting the situation through the words we use, we can make our everyday encounters go a little bit better. And then I really believe that if we all do these kinds of things, a little thing can add up to a big benefit.
Well, as I'm listening to you, I'm imagining that there are folks in our audience who are saying, sure, that works with reasonable people, but what about extremists? What about folks who are really, Klan members, white nationalists, folks who are taking an extreme, maybe even a dangerous opposition, thinking in that us-them way about, insiders and outsiders. I understand as I'm talking to you, I'm realizing I'm about to ask you two questions at once.
Okay.
So one of those questions is, does that listening carefully work with people who are, really extreme in their views? But I'm also thinking about the whole concept of belonging, and how does belonging help us understand why people become so extreme in the first place?
So in terms of belonging leading people to become extreme in the first place, it's easy to oversimplify these problems. Extremism, hate, terrorism, they're multifactorial, meaning that there's just so many causes, so many causal processes leading to that. I do believe that from my review of that research, that it's ultimately a perfect storm of factors that leads a person down that path of hate and evil. And one key part of that storm is a sense of being disconnected from the rest of humanity. And there's research by Ari Kruglansky, and then one person who I just love hearing is Christian Picciolini, who is a former member of a hate group. His story is well known. He's founded an organization to help convert and bring back or turn people who have drifted into these hate groups. One of the things he says actually is twofold. First, the reason people join these hate groups isn't because they subscribe to the ideology, but because they have a sort of defeated sense that they belong. He came from a pretty fractured family. He didn't have people to connect with. He felt alone. And then this group, this extremist group that he, quote, serendipitously ended up affiliating with, provided that sense of belonging and acceptance and importance, being a person that mattered, that just made him feel good, And that's as human beings, we're really responsive to that. And a lot of these extremist hate groups, they exploit that need to belong. They lure people in who are defeated psychologically, not always, I'm just sort of speaking generally, defeated psychologically, and provide that sense of belonging, but it's conditional on subscribing to a pretty poisonous ideology. So I do think, as Picciolini and Kruglansky have shown really eloquently, that people, it's a perfect storm of variables, some inside, some outside, but one of the key parts of the storm is feeling drenched with exclusion and drenched with negative messages about who one is or one's group more generally. And then the way to turn people, as Picciolini and Kruglansky more empirically with research go into, isn't by vilifying them, but by listening and connecting and providing a kind of relationship where the person's dignity feels affirmed. And then when that it's affirmed, they're much more open to change. Not always, I'm not being a sentimentalist, but that is what the research suggests, is that it is the connection that brings people back, the connection with a person who accepts you, the connection with one's family or with one's community that brings people back. And so I do believe it is part of this crisis of belonging, is that we're all doing things that, and the policies and so many things are kind of aggravating people's need to belong and making them susceptible to ridiculous and sometimes dangerous beliefs.
Yeah. A lot of your work is with younger kids, and I'm thinking about the example you just gave of Christians growing up and being, this fragmented, not having the sense of belonging, going back really to his childhood. And I'm thinking about some of the interventions you describe in your book that address the need for belonging in school settings, particularly as kids are transitioning maybe into middle school or into high school. And one of the things that I find so wonderful about your book is how hopeful it is, helpful and hopeful, because there are so many examples of ways to make difficult situations better. I'm wondering if you could give an example of one of those school situations with, younger kids, middle schoolers.
Yeah, and here I'm just being a curator for all this wonderful research done by, the many pioneers, Tim Wilson, Claude Steele, Greg Walton, David Yeager, Kurt Lewin, going back many, many years, Elliot Aronson. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that small things at the right time and place, tailored, targeted in time, can have a big impact. But it's not just any small thing. It has to be that kind of key message at a formative moment. And so one of the, just to give one example, one of the kinds of practices that seems to be very, very helpful is to give people an opportunity to express their core values. So what is it? Right? Because we are kind of, in this society, pretty forgetful creatures. It's easy to kind of lose track of what I really, really care about down to my core. What is my lodestar? What would I die for? And research over the past few decades, pioneered by Claude Steele, has shown that that's a very small activity. Taking some time to write about, even just jot down your core values, is affirming of the self, meaning it firms up our sense of self-integrity. It firms up our sense of who we are, and broadens our psychological lens so that a little adversity, a little stress, even a big adversity, a big stress, suddenly feels a bit more manageable. My colleagues and I, this is with Val Purdy-Vaughns and a dear colleague, Julio Garcia, who also passed away just over the past couple of years, tested the values affirmation technique in many, many different settings. But just to give one example, in that fraught transition to middle school, right, to 7th grade, you're pre-adolescent, I have kids, and I know firsthand, I've experienced firsthand how that moment is like the 60s of development. very turbulent, very turbulent. And it's very easy to go in the wrong direction and take a negative turn. What we did, to make a long story short, is in a randomized controlled trial to have some of the kids periodically over the year write for 5 or 10 minutes about their most important values. What's your most important value and why is it important to you? And I've read a zillion of these essays, and one of the things that always stands out is, even though it's a very brief activity, it's psychologically big. A lot of kids, especially actually low performing kids who have a kind of history of poor achievement, are often writing about things that are just very precious and deeply felt for them. And you can tell that the activity is kind of opening a channel in the classroom situation for something in their heart to manifest in a way that otherwise it wouldn't have had the opportunity to. And we found that this activity is very helpful for members of marginalized groups, especially. For instance, African-American students in the middle school study that I just mentioned went on to earn a higher GPA through their 2 years of middle school. But not only that, years and years later, we tracked down these students, found their official college enrollment records, and we found that those Black students who had completed that values affirmation activity in the 7th grade were roughly 20 percentage points more likely than their peers in the control group to be attending a 4-year college. Not that college going is a measure of success. We're not really telling people to go to college. What it does is it unlocks and makes it possible for people to better do what they're capable of, show what they know, and make it through some hardships. So that's just one example of many of these little things that we can do to create openings in situations for people to feel their authentic selves and to feel they belong.
Yes. When you were talking about opening yourself at school, I instantly thought of things that keep you from opening yourself at school. And one of those things is stereotype threat. And you, of course, write a lot in the book about stereotype threat. And I know you've done a lot of your research around mitigation of stereotype threat. And so for the listeners who might not know what stereotype threat is, could you just quickly describe it? And then I'm going to ask another question.
Of course. Stereotype threat is an idea that originated with Claude Steele and his colleagues, Joshua Aronson and Steve Spencer, who were exploring a kind of predicament that people are in when they are aware that they could be negatively stereotyped. And this is what's called stereotype threat, because at its heart, stereotype threat is saying that when we're in a situation where we feel we could be stereotyped negatively, and we really care about that situation, it's psychologically threatening. We feel stressed. Now, we've all been there. Like, I, as an academic, feel it all the time when I'm stepping into, a sports context, and I feel, that I could be seen through the lens of a stereotype of a klutzy academic. So we've all felt that kind of what's called social evaluative threat, where we could be seen negatively. And as a social species, that's really, really aversive to us, at least in these in the domain or an area where we care about doing well. What Claude Steele and his colleagues did was to show that stereotype threat helps to explain some portion of the achievement gap between underrepresented minorities and white students in school, between women and men in STEM, and other areas. The idea being that for these groups, the threat is a more chronic threat. And so could you imagine, one could imagine the situation where every day you're going to some place that, is socially sacred, school. This is about your intelligence. This is about your prospects to contribute to society. And you're aware that there's this stereotype out there potentially biasing people's hearts and minds, including your teacher. And that could just kind of make that situation of the classroom a lot more stressful, a lot more dire. And that's the phenomenon of stereotype threat. And I think it does raise this other really, really important theme about situations, which is that every situation, no matter what you're in, is experienced differently by the different people in it. And it's very hard. I mean, I find it hard to get one's mind around that idea that this situation I'm in may not be the same situation you're in. And what feels comfortable to me may not feel comfortable to somebody else. And so what Stereotype Threat shows is, yeah, that's really true. For a lot of these things that seem like pretty neutral, even innocuous, the standardized test ritual, it's not an even playing field. It's subjectively, psychologically, a very different experience for people who have been historically excluded or feel judged through the lens of these stereotypes.
Well, thank you for your elaborate description of that, and I'm sure it's helpful to the audience. But I wanted to ask you about that because one of the things that I was curious about as I was reading your book was the cover, right? So I'm going to hold up the book so people can see. There's an umbrella on the cover, under which it says belonging. And of course, the book is all about our need to belong and the science of creating connection and bridging divides. But I wondered, why is there an umbrella on the cover of Jeff's book? And then I came across the section where you talk about stereotypes raining down on people, and the umbrella clearly as a kind of protection against that. And so say a little bit more about the umbrella as it relates to this concept.
Well, I quoted Robin DiAngelo of White Fragility, who said that there are negative messages raining down on these groups 24/7, and there are no umbrellas. And I guess I'm saying that, yeah, no, actually, there are some umbrellas. There are some umbrellas, these protective psychological shelters that we can create. Not a physical umbrella, of course, but something kind of psychologically analogous to an umbrella that's both protective, right? You're being protected from the weather. You're not stopping the weather. It's kind of, the storm is continuing.
Yeah.
But you're protected momentarily. And the umbrella is a little transformative too. You're under it together. And that can kind of make the storm not just tolerable, but catalytic.
Yes.
So I think, so that's where the idea came from, that there are these little things that we can do to help people through the storm. One example came from a CEO I interviewed out here in Silicon Valley. She was trying to make it in, out here in Silicon Valley, it's a predominantly male, especially back when she was rising, it is a predominantly male arena. She was rising in the ranks as a female, and she was well aware of these negative stereotypes about women being able to make it as entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, especially. And she was about to give this make or break talk, and she was nervous, nervous as nervous can be, and we've all been there. And just as she was about to walk on stage, her boss came up to her and said, "You are transforming this company." And he looked her in the eye and said that. And that gave her the confidence, that feeling of belonging that really helped her to rise to that moment. And she did.
Yeah, it's a great story. That's a great story. One of the things you've already talked a little bit about is value affirmations. But I was struck by some research you cited in the book about how value affirmations actually can help protect against stereotype threat. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So one of the things when we're feeling negatively stereotyped or judged that can be helpful is to reconnect with our sense of who we are, to shore up our sense of self-integrity, to kind of realize that, okay, this situation where I feel negatively judged, that is aversive, yet there are things that give me sustenance, fortitude, that are bigger than this moment. And that's the idea, that by affirming one's core values, what one really stands for, it can be helpful to get through those moments with greater equanimity. And this comes out of a lot of research. Equanimity is probably the wrong word, with greater, with the ability to give to the moment what one can give to it. And so in a series of studies, these affirmation interventions have been shown to help people contend with stereotype threat, such that when people do that brief activity, they're more likely to perform better under certain key conditions when they care about doing well on a standardized test, when they're identified with doing well, and when the test is really, really difficult. So there's some threat there about potentially confirming the stereotype. Under that situation, these affirmation activities, taking a step back, remind myself of my core values, helps people to perform better. There's some really nice work by David Creswell, a neuroscientist at Carnegie Mellon, where he basically puts people in the scanner. I'm going to oversimplify, puts people in the scanner and has people complete a values affirmation activity through some visual stimuli related to their core values. And he finds that it actually activates the reward circuitry in the central nervous system. Now, it turns out that reward circuitry is actually a good thing because it down-regulates our stress response. There's something about the two systems that are intertwined so that activation of one down-regulates activation of the other. And he finds through these studies that these values affirmation activities have almost like a kind of of course they have a neurobiological basis, but what they are is psychologically rewarding in a really deep way that helps people get by these stressful situations. Now, of course, one thing I have to be really careful about as a psychologist, I don't want to psychologize problems. We're dealing now at a cultural moment where we are reckoning. It's like a great reckoning with these powerful structures and systems of exclusion that need to be addressed, and in some cases dismantled. So I completely agree with that. What this book is all about is about dealing with the cards we're dealt right here, right now. I am an educator, I'm a manager, I'm a parent. I gotta just deal with the situation as it is. What can I do? Or what can I do as a person who feels under threat? And there are these suite of, I would say, psychological techniques or practices that can be helpful to do for ourselves, but also to do for the people that we care about and that we love.
Yeah. You know, there are a lot of educators watching. There are a lot of schools that sponsored this event tonight. And one of the questions we got ahead of time is from an educator. I'm imagining someone is asking, what are the top 3 things schools can do to create a sense of belonging for students, recognizing that there's structural changes that are needed, policy changes that are needed, but at the individual level, perhaps, or the school leader level, the principal, someone like that. What are the things that you would say, you know, if you could do 3 things to increase belonging for students at a school, what would they be?
Well, there's many examples in it. I wouldn't want to pretend that I could give a recipe, right?
Got it.
But and there's many ways to answer this question, but I would say there's 2 that come readily to mind. Beyond all the interventions that there are out there, the social belonging intervention that I talked about earlier, where we're sharing stories, the values affirmation, these things are tools in a toolbox. So of course, there's a bunch of tools that we can take out of the toolbox to help us. But above and beyond that, there, I think, are 2 things. One is to fight the fundamental attribution error. And there's a number of sort of psychological calisthenics to do this. Fight the fundamental attribution error. Really be wary of the tendency to judge too quickly. And I think that is a constant peril, especially in our individualistic society where it's just so easy to judge. And so fighting the fundamental attribution error, being aware of these biases like confirmation bias, being aware of negative stereotypes and how they can kind of contaminate our perceptions of other people is so, so important. Richard Feynman, the famous physicist, has this injunction. You know, he's talking about science, but it actually applies to social life. Above all else, don't fool yourself. And you are the easiest person to fool. And I love that. As, you know, kind of resonates just thinking about with this Taoist tradition, Taoist philosophy. Don't believe everything you think. And this is just, our minds can trick us. And so if we learn about how fallible, we have some more humility, our minds are, we start to understand, okay, what I'm seeing, and especially my judgments, may not be trustworthy. And there's a whole suite of kind of calisthenic exercises. taking care of our head, creating head space and heart space so that we're more willing to be attributionally charitable in how we understand our students. So that's one, fight the fundamental attribution error. The second is obvious, but as social psychologists, sometimes we study the power, the non-obvious power of the obvious. This is listening. Listen to your students, ask questions, listen to the answers. It is what Nick Epley and Juliana Schroeder, two social psychologists, refer to as perspective getting. So too often we are just overconfident in our ability to read people, including our students, including our friends. But we get it so wrong. And then ultimately what happens is that we start to interact with someone, but that someone is more of a fiction of our minds than the actual flesh and blood person right before us. And because of these biases that we all share, they divide us. So one antidote is what Schroeder and Epley call perspective getting, where you just take the time to ask people good questions, like, what are you going through? Tell me more. What would you like me to know? And that is very helpful because for two reasons. First, we often don't think to do it. A lot of these studies talk about, they kind of reveal what we're failing to do in the control group. We're often failing just to ask people what their perspective is. And Schroeder and Epley show in a lot of studies that we overestimate our ability to imagine the perspective of others, so we fail to get it, ask questions. So one of my favorite examples of perspective getting is from a study by Jason Okanafua and Greg Walton and many others. Beautiful study. I'm going to make a long story short. They're looking at children who have been in a juvenile detention center and are trying to reintegrate back into high school. And they do a lot of things, including values affirmations for the kids and social belonging, sharing stories about the difficulty of this transition. But the other thing they do is they have the kids write a little letter to someone at their school that they want to get to know a bit better, an adult. And in that letter, they talk about what their dreams are in school and what some of the challenges are. It's a little like that book, I Wish My Teacher Knew, right? That book. And what they do is they then give those letters to the person so identified, and they find these whopping effects that the kids who go through that experience, who form that connection, who give their perspective to this person who now the teacher feels empowered, are much less likely. I think there's a 30 percentage point reduction in their likelihood of recidivism, that is going back into the juvenile detention center. So I think in this era where we're really interested in novel ideas, we should try some of the old ones. Try something, be critical of our own minds, and ask questions and listen to the answer. Yeah.
One of the questions we got early on was about that, though. How do you learn to be a better listener? My answer to that would be to practice. But someone is asking, if I want to facilitate interactive listening at my school, how would I go about doing that?
It's a skill set, and I know you've worked in this realm too. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. I kind of draw a lot on your work in thinking about this issue. I think it's an art form. It takes practice having these difficult conversations. So it's something that we can practice, and that there are a number of things we can do to practice it. I think that one of my, I think first of all, just having a growth mindset, right? Carol Dweck's idea that, we are all works in progress rather than finished products. And that goes for my social political beliefs, that goes for everything. And so having that kind of growth mindset about there's stuff the world is wondrous and mysterious and absurd in so many ways. It is not as logical as I think it is. And so opening ourselves up to that kind of humility and having growth mindset about our ability to learn is one key thing. And there's a nice little study by Phil Goff and Claude Steele where they show that when they bring, I'm just going to simplify it, Black and white students together to talk about this issue of racial profiling and policing,
Mhm.
The white students are under huge stereotype threat in that situation because, no one, because they worry about saying or doing something that could be construed as racist.
Yeah.
They're under their own kind of stereotype. And it turns out that being under that kind of stress is one of the worst things for learning. So they kind of seize up and they're not open to learning as much, putting their chairs even further away from the person that they're about to speak to. What they find is that if they instruct the students, hey, look at this as a learning experience. You aren't coming in here with the right point of view, you're going to learn. And this is an opportunity to learn. And we all, as you have said, make mistakes. And I do that in my classes too, kind of evoke this growth mindset for all of us. And that can be really helpful, especially if it's a norm. It's a kind of cultural norm that we're not only can we improve, but we're going to improve together.
Yes. One of the things that I often say, and I think this resonates with your, at the beginning when we were talking about belonging uncertainty, right? That everybody experiences belonging uncertainty at some time. And certainly when we bring people together to talk about difficult subjects, like the issues of racism, for example, many people in the room are feeling some belonging uncertainty in that moment, right? Or worry that they will not belong if they do the wrong thing, if they say the wrong thing, if they get too upset, if they, use words that are not politically correct, whatever it might be. There's worry about that and anxiety. And when people ask me, how do I get better at it? I always say, if you wait for perfection, you'll never get started,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
We just have to have that growth mindset, as you were saying. One of the things I want to say to the audience about this book, you're so fluent as you're talking about these various studies. And I know that if the audience is anything like me, they're trying to take notes and write down, who did he say? And what was that reference? But I just want to say, if you missed it, all you have to do is buy the book, because these examples are really elaborated in the book. And it's really, I was privileged to read an advanced copy, and I described it as really a masterpiece of social psychology, because it just seems like the greatest hits of social psychology are captured and described all in one place in a way that for the layperson, it really makes it very, very accessible. So I just say hats off to you, Jeff, for having put it together in that way. I really think it's just a real contribution. So I want to say that.
Thank you. That's very sweet and generous of you. Thank you.
Oh, and completely true, but thank you. But what I want to also say is that what I find so compelling about many of the examples, as we've talked about them, is that it's not that they're so strategic, right? And that goes back to the idea of situation crafting, that as you said, right moment, right thing at the right time with the right person, that crafting of the situation is so key. But as I reflect on it, what makes them so potentially scalable, and we live in a time when people are looking for solutions to problems. And then when you find a solution, people want to know, can you take it to scale?
Yeah.
But many of the things that you're describing are quite scalable because they're so brief. Could you talk a little bit about scaling?
Yeah.
In that way?
There's many ways to look at the problem of scaling. But one question is, what are we trying to scale?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people get it a bit wrong. They think we're trying to scale the physical intervention, like give them the values affirmation writing prompt, or give them the social belonging intervention, or give them the growth mindset intervention, or we've done work on wise criticism, showing that when teachers say, I'm giving you this feedback because I have high standards and I believe in your potential, then all of a sudden, many students are much more motivated to revise their essay, and they're more likely to go on a better track, especially if they're members of these kind of groups that have been historically seen as not belonging fully in school. So these are kind of concrete physical interventions. But what we're really trying to scale here is a psychological reality. It is not, 100 years from now, I don't know if the same I don't know if the same values affirmation prompt is going to have the same results. But what I will put my money on is people 100 years from now are still going to care about protecting their sense of self-integrity. And there's going to be a self-affirmation process in which if you help people to affirm themselves in these threatening situations through some means, some legitimate, credible, authentic means, they'll be more likely to feel okay, more likely to feel they belong, and more likely to show what they know. So I think what we're scaling here is perception, a belief in all of our potential to live together, to be ourselves together, and to grow together. And any intervention, if it's done in this kind of rote way, like, I'm giving you this feedback because I have high standard, believe in your potential, and the kid knows the teacher doesn't really believe it, that's not going to work. And I think that's where people get into trouble here, is that it's not the physical intervention that we're scaling. It is a mindset, it is a perception, it is ultimately a cultural movement that we can create together.
And it has to be authentic, right? It's the authenticity.
That's what we respond to. Harry Reese, relationships researcher, has shown that, yeah, that is the one thing that we really respond to, that sense that we're being responded to with authenticity.
Yes, yes. It's a very hopeful book because, as you said, there are a lot of things we may not be able to change immediately, but in the moment, we can change our situation in terms of how we are responding to each other or even to ourselves, right? When you talk about challenging that fundamental attribution error, that is an internal dialogue you can have with yourself. There's a phrase that you use in the book. It comes from, I think, some of Jennifer Eberhard's work, but you talk about psychological friction.
Yes.
Slowing things down.
Yes.
Maybe you could say a word about
that'd be
psychological
great.
friction.
Yeah, Jennifer did this amazing work where she worked with she's done amazing work all her career, but one of the studies that I highlight is this study where she had officers in Oakland, before they pulled over anyone for some traffic violation, she just had them introduce a little psychological friction by answering one question, which was, is this stop intelligence-led? You just stop and think. It's like an antidote to the Feynman self-deception. Wait, what am I doing? Do I have some intelligence on this person? And she found that reduced the percentage of black drivers pulled over by 43%. Meanwhile, crime was just going down throughout the city during the time of the study. So that's one example. Introduce a little psychological friction. We do some studies. Eric Ullman and I did some studies where we found that a lot of times the problem is our own minds trick us. Long story short, we found that when people were hiring someone for the job of police chief, what they did was they changed their criteria of the job to fit the qualifications of the male. So if the male had a kid and had a lot of administrative skills, people said, yeah, those are really important for the job. If they were street smart and didn't have a family, they said that was important for the job. And so and then they ended up feeling, when they hired the guy, like this is the perfect man for the job, when in fact they had picked exactly the right criteria for the man. So they kind of got it psychologically backwards. One little bit of friction intervention that introduced a bit of friction was just to have people commit in advance to their hiring criteria before they made their hiring decisions. And we found that this eliminated gender discrimination. So it's kind of like being kind of self-binded to the mast, to borrow a Homer illusion. So I think all these go back. One of the wonderful discoveries I had in writing this book was to learn the origin of the word respect. I'm really curious about this word because everyone uses it, right? And my kids use it, though I don't understand a lot of things, a lot of other things they say, like cap or all this other, but they do still use all through the generations. They use respect, and so it has currency. So I was like, well, what does that word mean? Let's look at the etymology of it, and it means to look again, look a little harder. And I love that. The word contains within it prescription. Look again. I love that.
Well, I think that is a great place for us to pause. I know that Lonnie has maybe a closing question for you, Jeff, but I just want to thank you for this contribution. It's just been a delight to read and a delight to talk with you this evening.
Thank you so much, Beverly. You've been such a wonderful colleague and friend over all these years. Thank you.
And I'll chime in, Beverly. Thank you so much for your time and your care with this presentation. Obviously, you're a huge devotee of both Jeff's work and the book. I too was so struck by it. I was telling everyone when I was reading it this summer on the beach, I was underlining and dog-earing the pages, and I'm not a big underliner in general. And of course, as I had mentioned to both of you earlier, that names of so many past fan speakers were just kept jumping out and jumping out and jumping out of the page. I'm like, ah! So it was a lot of chills and so much great learning available in the book. So I want to thank both of you so much. I want to remind everybody, fan, because we so respect this topic and love this book. We are going to do a buy one get one free. So buy a book from the bookstall, come to after hours, come join us. When you show up there, we're going to throw another link in there, and we will double your pleasure. We will allow you to have a book to give to someone else and pass the learning along and extend the learning. We're really grateful to that. We have a couple quick questions. Jeff, you had mentioned we've been putting in, as you've been naming a lot of folks, there's a lot of links we've been putting in chat for those. When we send out the video to everyone through the Zoom platform, we'll include those links. So if you're writing things furiously, we did capture a fair number of the names and we have some links for you. One woman did ask, you had mentioned, I think you mentioned Michael Schwalbe. Could you say the last name one more time for us?
Yes, Schwabe.
Oh, Schwabe.
Yeah, SCHWAEBE, Michael.
Oh, maybe that's why we couldn't quite get it.
So that work was so that work is not yet published in a journal.
Okay.
But it does have one paper out called The Objectivity Illusion, which is a really powerful paper that
we'll find it.
Themes.
And then one question that I liked in particular, Debbie posted earlier in this session. She says, why aren't people drifting toward groups based on community, caring, faith, etc., instead of hate groups?
What a great question.
Yeah, I thought so too.
What a great question. I'm just not sure. Maybe there's just not enough organization around these communities of love and caring. I mean, I don't know. I don't quite know, but there are like little spots in our neighborhood where these moments happen, at cafes, even bars, right down the street, where these moments of connection are possible. You don't have to go to a church or a community. You could just be kind in the Safeway. So I think it's not so much about a physical place. It's about creating the world of connection wherever you go. And I think that's one of the messages of the book.
Beverly, would you like to offer any, just add on to that at all? Do you have any thought on that?
Yeah, I do. Well, one of the things that we know, I mean, unfortunately, hate groups are very intentionally recruiting, right? They're very intentionally recruiting. We see this on college campuses. We see, flyers, advertising, trying to draw in disaffected youth into these circles. We see it on social media. And it is perhaps that other groups are not working as hard to draw people in. That I think about lots of organizations in the communities where I've lived doing great work, but they are not actively seeking. I mean, they're calling for volunteers, they're doing things, but we're not out on social media trying to get people to join in the same way. So it may be that we just need to think about how connecting communities, building communities where we are, to use Jeff's language, creating connection and bridging divides, how we can be a little more sophisticated about how we reach out.